Why are so many dogs suffering from health issues? Actress Katherine Heigl, who's helped save over 16,000 dogs through her foundation, says she's seeing more issues with dogs' joints, odors, and health than ever before. And after doing a ton of research, she feels there's one place we can look to support any dog's health: their food. So she decided to create something she could actually feel good about feeding her dogs. It's called Superfood Complete. Superfood Complete is made with over 30 of the healthiest ingredients on the planet, including several superfoods vital to your dog's health. Badlands Ranch also sponsors the Jason Debus Heigl Foundation, which has helped rescue thousands of dogs and place them in loving homes. Dogs across America are trying this food and experiencing amazing health benefits. Go to badlandsranch.com/save50 and order right now to get up to 50% off your regular price order with a 90-day money-back guarantee. If you want your dog to experience all these incredible things, go to badlandsranch.com/save50 today.
Brace yourself for something fuel nominal. Unleaded 88 is the clear fuel choice. It's cheaper, cleaner, and greener. And it's grown by Iowa corn farmers. Now that's totally worth the hype. So pump it up with Unleaded 88.
The following podcast may contain discussions supported by science that may be considered dangerous to some listeners and conspiracy theorists. Discretion is advised.
The 3 Down Greencast is brought to you by Lucky Bastard Distillers, Saskatchewan's premier distillery, and by the Pile of Bones Brewing Company, brewed in the heart of Regina. Welcome to the 3 Down Greencast. You are listening to the internet's Sergio Missed on Purpose podcast. I'm Joel Gasson with John Fraser, as usual. We have a few things to talk about today. As we've discussed in the past, interesting rider news surrounding this podcast tends to either happen like moments before we're going to record, or like it happened 3 weeks ago when we're finally talking about it.
That's fair. There's no real in between with us.
In this case, it was earlier before we record on this fine Sunday. The news that Nic Marshall in some legal trouble down south, some gun charges in Georgia. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk as well also sort of the early stages of the rider coaching search, which I'm sure behind closed doors will really be kicking into gear this week with kind of the entire CFL together in one area for Grey Cup week, of course. And then, of course, we will talk a little bit about the West Final and the East Final and the upcoming Grey Cup. But speaking of the West Final, our boy,
yes,
Sergio Castillo, he had not the best day we would have ever seen the man have.
No.
He missed a couple of field goals. I think one of them was a little bit. I mean, the wind was gusting the one way, so much so that Mike O'Shea took the wind in the fourth quarter rather than taking the ball, which was interesting.
And it swirls a bit in IG Field, so I kind of got it. They wanted to make it easy in case you needed Sergio to kick a game winner, but all thoughts aside, I really thought they should have taken the ball there. But you're right. Not our boy's best night. No,
and not making any excuses. I mean, that's his home stadium. He should be able to work through that. But there was actually a greater sort of thing. There's a greater power at work there,
and
that was as John does as he watches Bomber playoff games. He tends to consume a few beverages.
Just a few, just a cup.
In the past, we've talked about his horrific pregame one that we won't talk about yet, or hopefully ever again. But this time around, John was actually chatting with Sergio earlier in the day, and he let him know that for every time Sergio split the uprights, and I assume that's field goals and PATs?
That is field goals and PATs, yes.
Okay. You were going to take a shot.
Yeah, I started it in the last regular season game for the Bombers, where Sergio had a huge night, and I said, I started this thing, I'm doing a shot or doing a drink every time you put it through the uprights, and I have a headache today, thanks a bunch. Kind of like, I genuinely did. I had a shot or a drink for every time our boy put it betwixt the uprights. So I texted him that this morning, or yesterday morning, and he responded back basically saying, well, I hope I'm putting a bunch through the uprights. And we laughed about it, all was well, wished him good luck in the game. And then I see the 1-for-3 scoreline is, of course, I'm watching one of them being a doink, of course, and I'm going, and I believe it was you that suggested, he's just looking out for my liver. He knew his team was going to win the game. He's like, Got to think of my boy John. Might, he doesn't need to go that hard tonight. It's his middle child's birthday tomorrow. Better just, not have my best night. So that's why, Winnipeg fans, you have no reason to be worried at all. And dare I say, in a very much smaller case, this is a little bit of the Fraser curse popping its head up.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I think it's ultimately he is looking after you and your liver.
Right.
Because,
obviously, he doesn't know the endurance of my liver, so...
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that's fair, but it is also the long game. He knew there was going to be another week, and the way you watch that game play out, BC weren't going to score many more points, so... In the end, those 6 points didn't really make much of a difference, but I'm sure for your mental health, the extra 6 points, especially partway through the fourth quarter when it was still a one-possession game, probably would have helped a bit.
Oh, certainly. Or it just kept me on the edge of my seat. It kept me involved in that game, because it was like one of those that you're like, before the Hail Mary, it's like, well, okay, yeah. I know.
Well, yeah, because we had plans on Saturday night to go to a friend's house and hang out there with some people, and I was kind of like, oh. Earlier I had said, okay, the game's at 4:30, it'll be done by 7:30, we can leave, it's fine. But then I forgot about the stupid rest of the world changing their clocks.
Which pushes it to 5:30.
So it goes to 5:30 to by 8:30, and it's like, well, I guess we can't really wait that long to go to this thing yet. So then I was like, okay, well, I'll make a decision at some point during the game. Like, maybe it'll be a blowout, we can go, or it won't be that interesting, we can go, I can kind of catch up later. And then the game did just enough to keep me on the fence, where I was like, can this just break one way or the other, please, so I can make a decision on whether I should... Because, that Hail Mary at the half, I was like... Right before that, I was like, okay, yeah, we can leave at halftime. It's fine. Not a problem.
Yep.
And then they hit that Hail Mary, and I was like, oh. And then Winnipeg opts to give BC the ball after that, and I'm like, oh.
Right? I have no idea what Mike O'Shea was thinking there.
Yeah, I mean, they got away with it, but I was like...
Right.
Because if BC goes on to score a touchdown that drive, I think they win the game, and they're having a very different conversation about that decision.
Oh, certainly. And I it was one of those that just you go, okay, you've got a chance, you're at home. Ideally, you score a touchdown here. You probably don't need to worry about the wind in the fourth quarter. But, hey, I guess that's why Mike O'Shea is a successful CFL coach, and I am not. But, it would have been nice to see our boy put a couple more between the uprights. So thank you, Serge, for looking out for my liver. But trust me, that big guy, he'll be fine. You just go next week and win yourself another MOP.
Yeah, because next week, not to get too much into the Grey Cup just yet, but next week they're probably going to need those 6 points against that defense.
Oh, absolutely. And I have numbers. I have stats. I built a spreadsheet, Joel. I'm ready to talk about my fears about this year's Grey Cup.
So, yeah.
Sound real excited there.
I mean, and it's still a mind-blowing fact that this is the first time these two teams have ever played in a Grey Cup.
I know, right?
For a small league, small in terms of number of teams, and for how long it's been a league, the fact that two teams have not played in a championship game is mind-blowing.
I know. That's but I guess their eras of being good have never really crossed over.
No, it's true.
Like Winnipeg was when Winnipeg was dominant in the early 2000s, even though they never won, Montreal hadn't figured it out. Then you had the Calvillo years where Winnipeg fans suffered with the Joe Mack days and just the terribleness that was Bomber football for a lot of years. So I think this is the first time, at least in my memory, that both teams could be considered good. And everybody,
I think it was Plaster who was telling me that he believes in the 50s both teams were pretty good, but I mean I'm not up on my CFL history enough to know whether that's true or not or anything like that. But he was surprised. Yeah, he's like I didn't believe that at first.
See, and that's why Dan Plaster is too smart for this podcast.
Mm-hmm. I mean, many people are too smart for this podcast, so that's why we generally keep it to us.
That's absolutely right. And then every time we bring somebody else on, we're like, holy shit, they were way smarter than us. We can't have them on again.
Except for Greg.
That's. I mean, you know what? Greg and I are playing each other in fantasy football this week, and it is a 1.5 point game. So I don't want to ruin any last bits of karma I have here. So yes, we love you, Greg. You're definitely too smart for this podcast.
Anyway, so we're going to talk a little bit about the Grey Cup and some rider news around as well. But as usual for the Pile of Bones Brewing Company, John, what is in the glass this week?
Well, I'm not double fisting because I'm almost out of alcohol in my house. But what I am going with is, in my veteran parenting maneuver yesterday, I had my terrible pregame tradition of King Can of Labatt Blue. I wince saying that even. But I went to balance that out with some Spud Light. So, a person can still parent, and you have, a nice light beer, only 4%, and comes as advertised. If you like light beer without that sugary taste or supporting big industrial brands, then Spud Light it is. It's cool, refreshing, easy to drink, and all that kind of good stuff you want in a light beer.
Absolutely. For me, because we actually, I guess, inadvertently discussed this because I was also planning on having a Spud Light tonight, but because last night you said you were saving one for today, I had time to avoid the whole, we did the thing where we have the same beer thing that we tend to do often without even talking about it.
It's true. It happens quite a bit.
Yeah, it hasn't happened in a while, though. We've been pretty good about it.
No, because we've also been really good at, talking about what we're drinking on other days now.
Yeah.
We've kind of gotten into that rhythm, too.
For me, I have the official beer of the podcast, the White IPA.
Which was going to be the only other one that survived. I had one of those instead of a Spud Light during the game, right when that was the beer I went to right at halftime when they scored the Hail Mary.
Yeah, you need something a little stronger for that one.
Yeah, a little stronger than the Spud Light on that one here. That was cool, boy. No bueno there.
Yeah. Also no bueno right now for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. News just happening today on Sunday, November 12th. Details obviously still fairly light at this point. Defensive back Nic Marshall has been charged on gun-related charges in the United States. The whole story is up on 3downnation.com. Essentially, he and this woman were caught with sawed-off guns and some other stuff, which is mildly concerning, to say the least. Not a lot to say here, because obviously we don't know the details. We don't know anything like that. Of course, nothing's been proven in the court of law, all that sort of normal stuff that people talk about when these sorts of things happen.
Disclaimer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ultimately, I don't really know how much any of this matters for the fact that given the way last year went and given the way things kind of went for Nic Marshall at times on the field, I would suggest this was probably his last year in Saskatchewan regardless. So
Yeah, especially with even though Jeremy O'Day's still there with a new coach and you'd have to think new coordinator coming in. The thing that that always gets me is and maybe this is the way I look at it, and I might be alone on this one, is you hear gun charges, you think, I know gun laws differ a lot from Canada to state by state. You're maybe the guy had his gun, he got pulled over, something like that, right? You read that, but then to realize that he had again, allegedly, put that out there so we don't get sued. Allegedly, according to the police report, he had a gun modified to change a normal pistol to an automatic pistol, and you're like, why? I don't want to get into a big political speak here on my opinions on the gun thing, but it's it's one thing for you to be in the wrong state with the wrong gun in the wrong place, displayed incorrectly. It's another thing for you to have something that's illegal all the way across the states, but we all know what's going to happen is Chris Jones is just going to sign the guy next year, right?
I mean, it was probably the likely outcome anyway. Just because I know a lot of the discussion sort of at the end of last year was the divided locker room kind of between, the group that was good and, sort of liked the current regime. And then there was, the other side of the room that was still very much pro Chris Jones and it, caused friction. And I think we don't know for sure, but it's probably fairly easy to assume which side Nic Marshall was on. And
fair.
It's kind of felt that way at times. He had a good start to the year. He kind of disappeared for a while. There were, I think, fair questions about his effort at times throughout the year, and then the last couple of games he seemed to find it again, or he found some sort of give-a-shit level again late in the year at least. So I don't really know exactly what happened to him this year, but it certainly felt like it was going to end for him here this year. It doesn't take away anything he's done for the franchise or anything like that, but the writing was on the wall for that, and I think this, whether, proven or not, this now gives Jeremy O'Day a pretty easy out at this point.
Right, without really upsetting the fan base that likes a guy that does make a lot of exciting plays, and if you watch carefully, a lot of really dog shit plays as well. So, like you said, he was probably one of the guys that were going to be leaving. I wouldn't be surprised if almost everybody on that defense is going to be leaving because with how terrible they were this year. But like you said, gives Jeremy O'Day the easy out to say, listen, we didn't know if he's going to be suspended. Bye, Felicia.
And of course, I mean, maybe whoever the new head coach is could ultimately make a decision on that as well, because head coaches do have a lot of say generally in player personnel as well. They're the ones that work with the players every day, and they're the ones that develop the system that say, hey, we need guys that fit like this to do whatever we do. So naturally, who the head coach is ultimately going to be is certainly a topic for conversation as well as to whether someone like that would have stuck around or not. It's not entirely up to the general manager, and that search for the riders is continuing as we speak. Grey Cup week obviously kicking off here fairly soon. The teams will fly out in the next couple of days, head off to Hamilton, do all the sort of usual business that happens during Grey Cup weeks.
But ask about boinking, the usual stuff.
That question actually did not get asked last year. It's dead.
Seriously?
Yeah, it did not get asked last year at Grey Cup.
How did I feel like
I'm pretty sure we talked about it.
I'm certain we talked about this.
Yeah.
I just going on next to no sleep.
We decided to quietly just let that go, and I think all the media were pretty much, no one actually. There wasn't like a big FRC meeting where we sat down and talked about it. I think there was all just kind of a mutual understanding of, yeah, this thing's done.
No, and I would agree, and I'm quite glad to see it's done, especially when Mike O'Shea's been there the last 4 times. It gets little Department of Redundancy department. Well, I'm glad to hear that. But
yes.
Either way, yes, the rest of the song and dance, the players arrive, the state of the league kind of stuff, and you get all the GMs and all the governors in a room, but you're basically not allowed to announce anything.
No, but that doesn't mean there isn't stuff going on. So, I mean, there will be plenty of action behind the scenes this week as not just the riders, but every team sort of meets with people and, sort of unofficial, official sort of conversations happen. And by all accounts, there was the reporting by Farhan Lalji, or was it Dave Naylor? One of the two of them anyway, during the pregame show ahead of the division final games, talking about how the plan, and this has been talked about a fair bit, was, and I believe Jeremy O'Day said it himself at one point, the plan is for the team to have a head coach in place by the end of November. So if you're talking like the 20th next week, then post Grey Cup, we should probably be having an announcement fairly soon in that time frame afterwards of who the next head coach of this team will be. You've all heard the names at this point. Yep. No one's really, this is not an offensive coordinator situation last year where everyone was saying no. We haven't heard anything of that like yet. The lead favorite, I guess you could say, seems to be Scott Milanovic. We talked a bit about him before as well. But it was also interesting on the pregame show, they said both Buck Pierce and there's some others were actually expressed interest potentially in this job as well. So this is certainly not, a closed race by any stretch of the imagination. This is not a one-track race. Other names will certainly get on board. I think, they're going to talk. Henry Birch has obviously very much expressed his interest in the job. He probably needs a little more time there still. But the interesting thing as well they mentioned was that they still expect Jason Shivers to get a formal interview. Which I know may rub some people the wrong way based on what happened, but I think it's still good to do for your people. I mean, he's been a pretty good part of this franchise for the last number of years.
And it was really only this year that the defense, went off the rails. I mean, his defense traditionally had been really, really good, and you and I were championing him as perhaps a head coach replacement last year. Let's not forget that, I get this is very much a what have you done for me lately kind of business, kind of league, but he's been good for a real long time.
Yeah, and I don't anticipate he would actually get it unless, he really blows the doors off the thing during this interview. And where he proves that, as a head coach, he sees things completely different than what has happened here. But
yes,
I think it still is the right thing to do for your people. If there is interest in the building, if there are people in the building who you believe could do this one day, you should still grant them that interview just for the experience and for sort of the, culture, work culture kind of stuff to do. So I get that and I see that. I know some people will be like, oh, how could they talk to him after they had? Well, it's still kind of the right thing to do, even if he probably shouldn't get the job.
No, and at least though interviewing him, it also gives you the chance to see, okay, what's your tolerance level of working for whomever we hire, right? Like it gives them a chance to ask that question and see where his head's at. Like, let's face it, his stock has never been lower, so I'm sure he would even if he's not named the head coach of the team, I'm sure he'd like to have a sort of an in or at least a conversation with the incoming coach to say, hey, this is what I've done in the past. Maybe I can stick around and we can find a fit together, right? So because especially when it sounds more and more like they're going in an offensive direction.
Yeah, I certainly hope they do. No offense to like a Corey Mace or a Mark Killam out there, but yeah, I think it's time for this team to focus on offense.
Oh, certainly. Like it and that's the names being thrown around, and that's the pieces that are in place. on this club that, you know what, if they're going to win games next year, it's going to be a whole bunch of shootouts. And whether that's Harris or Dolegala or whoever is at quarterback, you know, I think that offense is built to carry this team to a few wins next year, unlike a couple years ago where, you know, you're essentially you're going to give Jason Shivers the opportunity to completely rebuild his defense because a lot of the pieces are there on offense right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big reasons why Scott Milanovich is seen as the front runner is because he's worked with Trevor Harris before.
Oh, 100%.
And they've had success together, so that's sort of the connection people are making. Rightly, Milanovich has come out and said, you know, I'm not going to publicly campaign for any jobs, which at this point in his career, he does not have to. So, I mean, more power to him to say, like, I'm here. If you want to talk, we'll talk. Otherwise, I'm content to do whatever.
Well, and I think, too, with the shitstorm the team has just gone through the last 2 years, as much as I think Buck Pierce is going to make a great head coach, as much as I think Henry Burris could make a great head coach, I think you need somebody who's been under the heat lamps before, who's been on the hot seat, who has the experience. Like, I don't think this is the time to go out and get a trendy hire, which is goofy, which goes against normally everything I believe in. But
I think I would prefer the Riders go down that route, go with like a Buck Pierce or Jordan Maksimic, but I fully understand that Jeremy O'Day probably doesn't have the rope to do that right now.
Well, no, because again, you look at putting bums in seats, right? At the end of the day, you have to put bums in seats, and that coach, rightly or wrongly, is going to be a big part of that compared to anybody else on this team for next year.
Yeah, so, I mean, we'll have to see how this plays out. I'm sure there will be plenty of talk and discussion over the coming week here in terms of which direction that may go, as lots of rumors tend to start coming out during Grey Cup week. I mean, that's when the Chris Jones stuff started here, right? So
I remember that, yeah.
That's what happened. There was the infamous, he talked to Daryl Davis one day, and Daryl basically straight up asked him, was like, would you be interested in something like, you know, working, you know, as the GM head coach here? And he's like, his answer was, I'm always looking to you know, progress in my career, basically.
Right, where he's like,
he essentially said it without saying it.
Yeah, I ain't denying this. And let's face it, it's a CFL. You know, the thing is like, if the Riders said that they want somebody in place by the end of November, which I think is great timing, gives you plenty of time into the offseason, they've already conducted 3 of it. There's 2 or 3 candidates that they've got in mind right now, no matter how many names get thrown out there, no matter how many guys say, yeah, I'm here, listen to me. They kind of have a decision made right now at this point.
Yeah, and I think the good news for them is, other than perhaps Buck Pierce, I don't think there's anyone else playing this week they are likely to talk to about this job. So they're certainly free to start laying the seeds and getting the groundwork done for that, because everyone else should basically be available at this point, because as we now know, the Grey Cup is between the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and the Montreal Alouettes.
You mean they're not going to talk to Jason Moss about the vacancy?
No, but I mean, based on his success this year, I guess they should be hiring Kahari Jones.
When you protect your corn and soy crops with Miravis Neal fungicide, you'll start seeing a lot more than just cleaner and greener fields. You'll get longer-lasting disease control, better plant health benefits, less plant stress, higher potential yield, and increased ROI potential. Ask your Syngenta retailer about Miravis Neo and start seeing more green in your fields, on your yield monitor, and in your wallet. Always read and follow label instructions.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, fired offensive coordinators apparently may become head coaches and lead teams to a Grey Cup.
Wow. And as an aside here, too, before we get into the matchup, the amount of disrespect for the Montreal Alouettes that's out there is crazy.
Yes.
Like, that's an 11-win team.
It's an 11-win team that's now won 7 games in a row.
Yes.
And beat the brakes off the best team in the league. Yeah,
and made Chad Kelly, who I think most people had as their MOP, look completely humble and human.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think I've seen, like, that Argos team was out beating teams with their backups, almost beating Winnipeg with their backups. And next thing you know, there's 7 turnovers.
Yeah.
Like, wow. Like,
yeah.
that in lies the beauty of the CFL, where you can, once you've clinched a spot, you can put so much shit on the back burner and just wait for the playoffs to let it out. And that is exactly what the Alouettes did. And holy shit, did they look good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, 2/3 of the game looked good.
Right.
In that East final, obviously, their defense was otherworldly. Special teams contributed with the return touchdown where it looked like, I remember I was sitting there, I'm like, okay, the Argos are on the board. They got something going here. I believe it was only like a 2-possession game at the time or whatever it was.
Yes.
It was not out of question that had the Argos clicked, they might have been able to come back. I was like, all right, if Cody's got something in him, now's the time. And then they just go ahead and return the kickoff for a touchdown. I was like, oh, or not.
Yep, exactly. Well, I guess we can put this one to bed. You're right. Like and it was even funny because that's when you were getting like after that touchdown to make it close. Rod Smith was like, oh, anything can happen. It's a CFL kickoff return touchdown next play. Yep, not so much. That conversation stopped right away, largely because Glenn Suter was not in the booth as well. So, yeah, Montreal is and. The worst thing with a disrespected team like that, they know they're disrespected, and they'll listen to it, and they'll be fired up, and they'll have a chip on their shoulder. So,
yeah, I would say right off this team at your own peril. I mean, a lot of people, I mean, kind of made this mistake last year too. I think we were probably kind of amongst them, where it looked like Winnipeg should easily handle the Toronto Argonauts last year, and
yeah,
look what happened. I mean,
exactly. Well, exactly, and the things you saw from like. Guys we like in Winnipeg media going, oh, it's the Grey Cup here in Winnipeg. No, it's not.
No.
Like, holy crap, you're playing outdoors in November with a tough defense and the world's most overrated quarterback. There, I said it. You knew it was coming.
I don't know about world's most overrated, but definitely
CFL's
in the conversation overrated. For the CFL for sure, yes.
I would say the CFL's most overrated quarterback right now in the postseason.
Mm-hmm.
Put the asterisks up. In the postseason is Zach Collaros. And Joel, I got numbers.
Yeah, you pull back the curtain a little bit. Earlier today, we were discussing, or was it yesterday? Whenever. It was earlier today, discussing what we're going to talk about today. And he was like, oh, I'm going to round up Zach Collaros' playoff numbers because I assume we're going to talk. So it's going to be brought up. I'm like, by you? He's like, yes.
I was going to find a way to bring it up.
Because, yes, if Chad Kelly, who... To me, Brady Oliveira, to get into this conversation a little bit, to me, Brady Oliveira is hands down should be the MOP this year.
Yes.
If we're talking purely by definition of outstanding, his season as only, I believe, the second Canadian ever to have a combined 2,000 yards on offense. Yep. To me, that meets the definition of outstanding. Chad Kelly was Zach Collaros plus during the regular season where he was good. He was serviceable. He wasn't asked to do a ton. I wouldn't necessarily describe his season as outstanding, but merely very good, if that makes any sense.
But I mean, when the voting base gets smaller and smaller, with
yes.
more and more people that don't watch the games, like, I'm speaking as a man, and I get hit on all the time, like not in the good way. Like I get hammered on Twitter.
No one hits on you.
Nobody hits on me. I get hammered on Twitter when I bring this up. Mm-hmm. But like as a guy that watches every down of Winnipeg football, I can tell you, Zach's got good games.
He does, yep.
But he's got a lot of stinkers, and a lot of stinkers in the playoffs. And you could not have watched that game yesterday. We both agree Buck Pierce is a great coaching mind.
Yep.
The game plan ran through Brady Oliveira.
Yeah.
It ran through limiting Zach's mistakes. Like, that's not Winnipeg's normal game plan. And again, I've watched every down of Bomber football this year, minus a game here or there. And I can tell you that's an entirely different offense that they trotted out against BC. Now, again, is part of that because BC couldn't stop Oliveira for a half? Of course. Right? I mean, if running the ball is going to work, if you're getting 6-7 yards every time, you're just going to keep running the ball, right?
And it certainly helped as well that the Lions lost 2 key receivers early, and then VA was a little banged up, so he wasn't really running, and then he was seeing ghosts, and he was, holding on the ball way too long. So it was clear the Lions, despite being in it most of the game, weren't really going to get over the hump offensively.
Well, and that's it. And minus the Hail Mary, I think, you only gave up you gave up 3 points in a Hail Mary, which was a great throw, which was a great play, great heads-up play by the receivers. But again, at the end of the day, if he's the guy that your team runs through, why are you game planning away from him? And
Drew Brown could have won that game, quite frankly.
I could have challenged to win that game.
And the reason why we talk about this with Zach Collaros is he's held to such a high standard in this league, and he should. Like, he is no question. Right. He's without question one of the best quarterbacks in this league right now. I think that just generally speaks more to the sort of overall level of quarterback play than necessarily him.
Right, but it's just funny to see the narrative come up time and time again that come the playoffs, it's like, oh, look, Zach's back. Look, Zach's doing his thing. Zach is the smallest part of every Winnipeg playoff game.
Mm-hmm. Well, we discussed this last year, and I ran through the stats, I believe, at the day of the Grey Cup or leading up to it with Duncan Hodge, and they were actually amazed at how bad Zach's stats were.
Right. He averages in the playoffs since he took over in Winnipeg. Now, I'm not comparing his previous playoff stats because we're just talking about the juggernaut that is the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He has one game over 250 yards, that coming in the 2019 West Final. He averages over 9 games, 202 passing yards per game with 6 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. None of those, like, if I told you that I've got a quarterback that you're going to go into the playoffs, Joel, at any level of football except maybe low-level NCAA and Canadian high school, and I'm going to give you a quarterback that averages 202 yards a game with more interceptions than touchdowns in his last 9 games, do you think you're winning that game?
No.
No. Like, you look at the raw numbers, and regular season success aside, I don't get it. And let's face it, in 2019, you had Chris Streveler.
Mm-hmm.
In 2021, you had an all-time performance from Sergio Castillo on one of the best defensive plays in Grey Cup history, the interception in overtime.
Yep.
Like, let's face it.
And wasn't that Andrew Harris's big year?
That was also Andrew Harris's big year. So 19 was Harris's big year. So 19 was Harris's big year. And then he also had he had Streveler, right? They went with basically, we were joking, single wing, right? When they go back-to-back in 2021 in the Grey Cup game, again, he's 240 for 2-2, so 2 big mistakes, and that's just like, that's also the only game he had over, 25 pass attempts in. So they asked him to win it. He couldn't really. Let's face it, it was Sergio winning that game.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? In the West Final, in last year's losses, he did not crack 200 passing yards. 178 in the West Final, 183 in the Grey Cup. Yesterday, 158-0-0 in the West Final. I don't care how good your running game is because you look, BC stopped it. Yep. BC brought their secondary down near the line of scrimmage and went, okay, Brady's not going to beat us anymore. Go ahead and beat us, Zach. And Zach had one drive. I'll give him that. He had one drive where he looked like regular season Zach. But this is it. It's just seeing this narrative over and over and over again. And then seeing what Montreal did to Ouellette and the rest of the Toronto Argonauts, me as a Blue Bomber fan is going, okay, Zach's going to have to win us this game, and his playoff history says he can't and he won't.
Yeah, because this Montreal defense is built very differently than the BC one. BC is just kind of a, everyone they talk about it, they're undersized, so it's difficult for them to stop a running team like Winnipeg for 60 minutes. So yeah, they kind of figured it out eventually, but it was probably too late at that point. And, their offense was sputtering so much that they couldn't really get it back on track.
Well, yeah, VA was clearly hurt.
Yeah.
VA was hurt. They have no run game. They haven't had a run game to speak of this entire year.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked their run game to at least do something for them, and it couldn't. And VA was, I know we joke about good VA, bad VA, but that was bad VA for a reason. Like he was. I
don't place it entirely. The whole it was a team loss for the Lions, no question about it. There was a lot of discussion in the week leading up to it about the Lions being able to handle being an outdoor team going into Winnipeg in the winter, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think
+2.
None of that played into it. That didn't matter at all. I think they even handled the noise decently okay.
Yeah.
They just didn't execute when it came down to it. And Winnipeg's defense, they balled out. They played one of the best games we've seen from that unit in quite some time, quite frankly. Not that they played poorly for the last while, but we haven't seen the Winnipeg defense do that in a while, and that's something to keep an eye on heading in this Grey Cup.
Well, and that's the thing with that Winnipeg defense is they're the ultimate. They can turn it on when they know they need to.
Mm-hmm.
It's rare that you can ever see a football team that can be like, all right, we're going to coast through the next 4 or 5 games, then ratchet it up and actually be good again.
Mm-hmm.
Winnipeg's D has done that the last 4 years.
Yeah.
That they have games that you're like, they're okay. They're decent. But again, this comes down to the fact that Richie Hall knew he was seeing the BC Lions a month ago.
Yeah.
He was able to draw something up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now the thing that makes it extra intriguing is Montreal is playing off the charts good. They've been disrespected by just about everybody. They're probably going to come in as a huge betting underdog.
I think it's opening at 7.5 or something I saw. So.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
Over a converted time. Wow.
Yeah. And then I hope the over-under isn't set very high this game because this This could be some Big Ten football on Sunday.
This could be 12-10 where Sergio actually gets his MOP.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not expecting fireworks. Both offenses. I mean, Winnipeg's offense is capable. Whether, which Zach shows up will be the question. Montreal's offense has been what it's been all year. Cody was, just as irrelevant pretty much in Montreal's win over Toronto. Maybe he did a little bit more than Zach. I shouldn't maybe, go that deep on Cody on that. But this is something we do need to talk about, though, because it's going to be a conversation throughout the week, of course. And that's, of course, that not too long ago, both of these guys were on the Rider roster. Ha ha ha. What did they do? Well,
so was VA.
Yeah, so VA, I mean, he never really got a shot. We can't really know what would have happened there.
But he was.
He was, and I always would have liked to have seen him get a real chance because I've always liked VA, and I think he's starting to figure it out, unlock his potential finally. And I also want to give VA credit in that football game. Like, he took an absolute beating. He was clearly hurting, and some of it was his own fault for hanging onto the ball too dang long at times, but regardless, he hung in there and he battled as hard as he could to try to win that game. So that's a side of VA. I don't know if everyone knew if VA had that in him or not, because he's sort of the running finesse quarterback. Sometimes doesn't get the credit for being tough. I think VA showed in that game that he's tough and he can hang in there when he needs to.
He was like the bad guy in a horror movie in that game. He just wouldn't die.
Yeah,
like he kept getting hit and shot and hit some more and hit some more. He just kept getting up. He was like Jason in Friday the 13th. The man wouldn't die and just kept hanging around. And I loved watching it. I like VA. I'm a big VA guy. That made me even more of a VA guy, right? Yeah. So no, whatever the over is on the Grey Cup, don't take that.
No,
take the under.
But yeah, I mean, obviously, yes, of course, it wasn't that long ago that both Cody Fajardo and Zach Collaros were on this roster. So of course, naturally, the internet's having some fun at the Riders' expense, and that's fine. I have no problem with that.
Including myself.
Yep, I have absolutely no problem with that. But the narratives around, what could have been or something or other, these lines, like, let's just stop here, okay? Make the jokes. I don't care. It's fine.
Yes.
It's cool. Fair game. The Riders have deserved it at this point. But be realistic about what this is. Yes, they're both former Riders. Neither of them were going to work out here the way it ended. I mean, you could tell the entire time Zach Collaros was in Saskatchewan, something just felt off about it. The guy seemed miserable for whatever reason. It just wasn't a fit. He was not going to be a long-term solution. And had he not taken that hit in Hamilton, it's hard to say if he actually, what it turns into. But I don't think it's whatever. It definitely isn't what happened in Winnipeg, and so it wasn't going to work out for him in that degree here, and it just wasn't a fit. And then you saw it as soon as he went to Winnipeg, he seemed like a completely different person.
Oh, 100%. Well, but a big part of that too was Zach Collaros has always had the knock of health, and let's face it. Saskatchewan, everybody seems to forget this. Saskatchewan did not trade him to Winnipeg.
No, he got traded to Toronto. Toronto gave up. Technically, Toronto was the one that blew it.
That's exactly it. So all this narrative of what could have been. Zach Collaros in Winnipeg would be in Saskatchewan still would be retired by now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no way he could have taken the beating he took. And I even would argue, if it wasn't for the pandemic closing down the year, that Zach Collaros would be retired by now.
Mm-hmm.
He had a full year to let his body heal and be healthy. And Zach Collaros, as much as we're talking about his terrible playoff numbers, it wasn't until in 2019 he looked like the guy that fit the system, that could throw the ball because Chris Streveler couldn't. He could throw it better than Matt Nichols could. He just kind of looked like the system guy. Coming out of the pandemic cancellation, he looked like an MOP quarterback in the regular season again. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, is because his body had time to heal. That never happens in Saskatchewan. He gets beat to shit, and again, all the talk of the what if. Cody Fajardo was the same Cody Fajardo in Montreal he was in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, I mean, he was somewhere between 2019 and 2021. Cody, he was a little better in some.
2019.
Yeah, no, he wasn't, and let's not forget. I mean, Zach Collaros became expendable because Cody was so good that year.
Exactly.
And so, I mean. Clearly, Jeremy O'Day chose his coach over the quarterback because Craig Dickinson decided to move on from Cody Fajardo, and history suggests you should never choose a coach over a player. But regardless, I don't think in the end, had they made the decision the other way around, I don't think it would have really worked out anyway. I think the first sign of adversity, this fan base would have been all over Cody again, and things would have just gotten more sour. And as much as maybe the team wanted to move on, I think Cody, whether he publicly would ever say it or not, probably wanted to move on as well. The fact that it's working out for him somewhere else, I don't think is necessarily, something to hold against the Riders. It's like, well, okay, maybe he was wrongly scapegoated, but it was time for everyone to move on, and players have the option to move on as well. So, I mean, he said it to Dave Naylor last week, because everyone was like, there was always the thought of, okay, if Trevor Harris doesn't leave Montreal, where does he go? And some people think he just ends up back in Saskatchewan if he doesn't have any other offers. No, he was going to sign in Toronto. He was going to battle Chad Kelly for that job.
Wow.
That's what he told Dave Naylor last week. He was going to sign in Toronto until the Montreal option became available.
Well, and the funny thing is like, if you actually look at his numbers and like, again, we're all going to make the jokes, we're going to make the memes, it's all funny and stuff like that. There was one starting quarterback he had more pass yards with that played in 18 games this year. Can you name him? Joel Gasson.
This year?
One quarterback. So out of all the quarterbacks that played 18 games or were dressed for 18 games this year, Cody Fajardo only had more pass yards than one of them.
Well, wasn't Jake Mayer the only guy that played all 18?
Well, no, dressed for all 18.
Oh,
so when I'm on the CFL's website here. I'm working with what I can. I had to go to a third-party site, get those Zach numbers from 2019, all right? So in terms, in the CFL's eyes, game played is you were there, you're on the sidelines holding the clipboard, or you were on the field. So out of the actual guys that, like, obviously it's not VA, Zach, Jake Mayer, and Chad Kelly all finished ahead of Cody Fajardo. There's one other quarterback who dressed for 18 games that he's ahead of.
Dressed for 18.
Dressed for 18. Only one.
Drew Brown?
Dustin Crum.
Oh, yes.
So outside of Dustin Crum, he is apparently, according to CFL.ca, which take that for what you may. Cody finished 3,800 yards. Dustin Crum, 3,100. Jake Dolegala, 2,600 in this. So it's not like, so these people that are out there suggesting that keeping Cody would have led to success just because Cody's success is there, that's a terrible take. And I am a man that knows terrible takes because normally it's me spouting them. But no, Cody Fajardo was, God, I think he was worse than 2021 this year. Or 2022. Sorry, slightly better. You are right. He was right betwixt. He was almost right in the middle. Good job, Joel. Of the 4,302 yards he had in 2019 and the 3,300 he had last year.
Yeah. So, and I mean, none of this to say like I'm thrilled for Cody. I'm
glad
guy. He's gone somewhere where he can kind of live that hockey player in the South life, where he can be essentially anonymous in the community, but still important enough to play football and be a starting quarterback and get to do all of that. But he's not in the fishbowl. He can just concentrate and not worry about any of the stuff because clearly he gets caught up in all of it, and he doesn't have to worry about that. So it was a great spot for him. I'm glad it's worked out for him. I hope he continues to be at that level, at least at a level where he is able to lead a team to success because he deserves it. He's a great dude, and he is a pretty good football player. It just wasn't going to happen here.
No, certainly. But the more and more I look into the Cody stats than the Zach stats, like, are we going to see a game decided on a rouge here? Like, are we going to see like a 7-6 game?
I don't imagine it'll be that low.
I don't know. Yeah, I think it could be. I mean, let's face it. If bad Zach shows up and regular to bad Cody,
I mean, Sergio's going to knock at least 3 or 4 through, right? So
that's fair. No, you got Sergio outdoors. But what if it's like windy and cold? What is the weather supposed to be like? If it's windy and cold and guys aren't kicking until like the 30s, this is going to be like a 3-2 game. It's going to be a hockey score.
Well, let's take a look here. Hamilton weather forecast. As of right now, it's going to be like 7 degrees on Sunday.
Oh, yeah. Sergio, MOP, it is back in Hamilton where it should have happened. It's going to happen now. Sergio's going to have 5 field goals and win a 15-12 thriller over the Montreal Alouettes.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.